Hi, this is Shane Petzer speaking for PPR 490, week 9, March 2016. And I'm looking at the rise of modernity and liberalism in the Society of Friends. And I'm looking at how modernity's development influenced Quaker views of the spiritual roots of peace and justice. And I'm also going to sort of take a little commentary on the second discussion, and that is the professionalization of peace and justice and the prophetic in the 21st century. I think if you have to look at the liberal tradition in Quakerism, I think that one, you probably be asked whose view you're representing and questioning. But I think that in terms of a spiritual root, in terms of Quaker animation of peace and justice, there is a kind of nod to the biblical tradition, even in the most liberal Quaker traditions. And I don't think that you can see that even with writers like Elise Boulding, that there is conceptually these roots in the sort of biblical foundations, like Matthew 5, the famous pacifist reference. The other thing is that modernity and liberalism is kind of like influenced by Quakers in the Crimean War, and to a lesser degree in individual Quakers' involvement in peace activism and anti-war activity in the Anglo-Boer War. Um, and you know, you can't really sort of uh, discount that the hedge was breaking, after the split, the 1827 split, and the move um, by many friends into anti-slavery activism, and that meant collaborating and working with a lot of other non-Quaker but other Christians, and this kind of collaboration and forming of organizations which acted against injustices was sort of the impetus was a religious and spiritual one, but the collaborating with other groups gave shape and it gave a platform for other people to be able to participate with other secular or humanist or political impetuses. And as that activism moved, certainly in the Americas around the Civil War, and then in terms of a transatlantic, U.S. and Britain, the participation of Quakers in the women's movement, I think a lot of lessons were learnt out of that hedging out, as it were, and to collaborate with others. And certainly the influence of people like Rufus Jones and Wilhelm Rowntree and W.C. Braithwaite, and the ideas of Darwinism and higher criticism of the Bible, and the sort of later evolution and innovation of the inner light theology, which only really came to sort of take the kind of language shape that we're familiar with in the liberal tradition in the 20th century. Certainly, the two world wars impacted on Quaker notions of pacifism and nonviolence and resistance, and helped sort of change this ideas of being what it was to be a peace church, the peace testimony, standing against war, leading to a more sort of what's been described as a sort of diffuse testimony for peace. Um, if you look back in history, the sort of shape of meetings for sufferings was the kind of collective voice of Quakers. And in more recent times, in the 20th century, this sort of liberal modernist impetus gave rise to the sort of formations of Quaker interest groups. In America, the American Friends Service Committee, and in Britain, the Friends Service Council, and later the FWCC as a sort of global Quaker voice, is a sort of perhaps a knee-jerk reaction to a resistance to Quakers being paid for their ministry, but in this way, a sort of more of a secular shaped organization, although being essentially a Quaker organization, sort of maybe excused this idea of the earlier resistance to paying for hireling ministries. But certainly this impulse led to the establishment of groups, advocacy groups like the Frigs Committee for National Legislation in the US, and Quaker Action in the form of Quaker Peace and Service, and later QPSW, and in many parts of the world, in tandem with the work of local Quaker monthly meetings, are peace centers. And, out of this, independent peace educators and programs and study programs attached to universities have evolved. So the sort of full picture has evolved of different kinds of sort of legitimate Quaker activism. Another issue is the problematic in the contemporary era of a sort of empowered Quakers able to participate in the political process, meaning that there's potential for Quakers to actually become the president of a country, and in many circumstances that means being the commander-in-chief of the military. And I think these were particular quandaries theologically for people like Herbert Hoover and later Richard Nixon. So yeah, so yeah, I think that you can see that we've looked at redefining testimony in the 21st century as newer challenges, such as the development of a thermonuclear atomic bomb. I think that shifted theology forever, and Quaker responses or Quaker participation or pioneering engagement with groups like C&D, the Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament, also the very idea that we could destroy ourselves, through, abuse of the environment, and the sort of strong Quaker involvement in groups like Greenpeace and, other formations like Amnesty International, um, which had quite a strong Quaker component, and many Quakers still work within those structures. Um, the other thing is that I think that there's always a kind of shift between reconciliatory and prophetic. I don't think it's necessarily either or. I think that sometimes a reconciliatory approach is a strategy, a tactic that Quakers take, whether to set up, a collaborative organization to animate and act out the desire for peace, or whether it's a standalone Quaker organization. And sometimes, this means that some of the voicing needs to be a lot more prophetical in tone. But I think that the liberal optimism is something which kind of drives and gives a lot of meaning and impetus to Quakers in the contemporary era. Thank you very much.